Welcome, welcome, welcome to our webinar on what is poisoning your company culture. My name is Brett Hoogeveen. I'm one of the co-founders of BetterCulture. If you are here as because you've been invited by one of our partners, whether that is a local chamber of commerce, whether that is an HR association, whether that is any of our other partner groups that are helping us make the world a better place to work, thank you for being here, and thank you to our partners for taking the opportunity to spread our message. We really are on a mission to try to make the world a better place to work, to help leaders and organizations that want to excel when it comes to their ability to attract, to build, to motivate, and keep people, because better culture leads to better business. As I kick off these webinars, I always like to take a little bit of time to just give a little background on that overall framing of what we do and why there's value in making sure that we're leaning into becoming better and stronger leaders, better and stronger organizations. It's good for you, it's good for your people, and it's really, really good for your company. So let me kick off just with a little bit of background on the value of working continuously toward building a better and stronger culture. Before I get into today's topic, which is the number one poison for your company culture. Ooh, scary, right? This is my favorite data meta-analysis. I'm only going to give you one research point here this morning. We probably could point to hundreds, but Forbes back in 2016, I know, 7 years ago, but things haven't changed, did a meta-analysis of all the research out there on employee engagement and culture and leadership, et cetera. And they said, look, here's what it boils down to. Just about anything you can do as a leader or as an organization that will improve the life or satisfaction of your employees, okay? Anything you can do to improve your employees' lives or their satisfaction and contentment, enjoyment, engagement with their work on a regular basis will in turn, A, improve their performance, and B, buoy the organization as a whole. So that is about as clear of a quote that I can find that links better culture, better leadership, better employee engagement with better company results. And that's what we're all after, is both of those things. Okay. I like to go through this quickly because I know there's always some new folks on these calls and some old folks, and I don't want to make you hear the long story multiple times. But our organizations, BetterCulture and our sister brand Mindset, both spun out of time that our founder spent as the founding president and CEO of an Omaha-based company called QLI. And QLI is a specialty healthcare provider, but most importantly for us, they were named 5 times in a row under Dr. Hoogeveen's leadership for 4 of those times, and then their new CEO, Patricia Kearns, who's fantastic for the last one, 5 times consecutively the #1 best place to work in the entire metropolitan area of Omaha. Well, as we move forward, we said, what could we do to spread some ideas, some approaches, some tactics more broadly to help other organizations be better places to work? And so in about 2011, we started working hands-on with clients through our company Mindset, doing in-person leadership training, employee engagement surveys, consulting work, really getting hands-on with client organizations to figure out how could we partner with them to create better strategy around culture, to develop their leaders, and to bring tools and ideas into their organization and into the bloodstream of that organization to help them continuously make progress on their culture. A couple of years ago, we said, we've really been able to produce results with our local clients. Could we figure out a model that scales more, both across geography, to smaller organizations, and also in a way that allows us to grow our business through a digital approach? And that's what BetterCulture is. So both Mindset and BetterCulture are our brands and our companies. It's just sort of a hands-on versus a little bit more hands-off approach. That's the difference there. And we're on a mission to make the world a better place to work. Well, guess what? Today, I'm going to tackle one of my favorite topics. We do a lot with Mindset and BetterCulture that is focused on making the world a better place to work, developing leaders, really thinking about the glass being half full. What can we do to consistently help organizations strengthen their cultures, build their leaders? We're always adding new ideas and pushing people in a positive direction. Well, that is probably 90+% of what we focus on. But there's a really important 10% that we also focus on, and that you can't afford to miss as an organization if you're trying to build a better and stronger culture. And that is the negative side of company culture. Not what could you do to make it better, but what's actually holding you back. What are the things that are making your organization a worse place to work, that are hurting employee engagement, that are hurting performance, hurting profitability? What are the biggest poisons to your company culture? So I've already covered the value of culture. I'm going to share with you the top poisons here in just a second. Then later on, I'm going to give some thoughts on what it takes organizationally to try to address these poisons. And lastly, I'm going to share 3 or maybe 4. I think I added a bonus since I wrote this slide that says 3 tactics, if I have time, on specific things you can do to try to address these poisons in your work environment. If we have time at the end, and if you are willing to stick around, I am always happy to take questions and to chat as we close things out. So that's where we're headed. I am really bad at checking the chat box. So if you have questions, throw them in there at any time. Just know I might miss them for a while until we get later into the program. But feel free to ask questions at any time, and I'll try to catch them as we go. So in leading up to this webinar, we wrote a blog a month or 2 ago that will spoil where I'm going with you on this. But in leading up to that blog and this webinar, we did some research. And, you can do research either in really wonky academic journals, or you can just Google, all right? In this instance, I Googled because I already know the answer to these questions from Mindset's perspective. But when I Googled, when I searched, what are the most common causes of bad cultures or of toxic workplaces? Here's what I found. And I think all of this is valid. And I'm going to share all of these because I want you guys to hear not what can you do to make your cultures better, but what are the things that are probably happening inside your organization right now, if you're an organization of any size, that are making it just a little bit of a worse place to work every day. The MIT Sloan Management School of Business indicated these 5 things. A work environment that doesn't feel inclusive, disrespectful behaviors, unethical behaviors, a backstabbing, cutthroat, dog-eat-dog type of a culture among participants, and lastly, abusive behaviors from management. So managers showing up in a way that's intimidating, that engenders fear and intimidation, that makes people worried about how they're being perceived or how they're being performed, et cetera, or how they're performing. Now, I will grant the MIT Sloan School of Management, that's a pretty compelling list. Atlassian, which is a more of a modern software-based company that does team-based softwares, they gave also 5 characteristics of an unhealthy team. They said, look, teams that have little or no enthusiasm, where there's a fear of failure across the organization. People are afraid that they don't have that psychological safety that you may have heard about. People are afraid to say, oh yeah, I screwed up, or I don't know how to do this, or I need help. Okay. That causes disengagement. Just general dysfunction or confusion, not alignment, people being unclear about what needs to happen or why, or what our priorities are. Never ending gossip and drama. This is a big one because it's so tactile. It's so noticeable. If you have an ear for this, which unfortunately I think I do, when you hear unnecessary, hurtful, either hurtful toward people or hurtful toward the organization, gossip, it does just steadily and consistently undermine workplace cultures. And lastly, high turnover. I think that's more of a symptom than a cause, in my opinion. But they use that under sort of a cause. And lastly, Tiny Pulse, which is a great survey software company that takes pulse surveys of your employee culture across your organization. They said, look, here's five more reasons for low engagement. Lack of communication. Employees not feeling like they're appreciated, or appreciation initiatives being undervalued. No fun in the workplace. Limited opportunities for professional development. If people feel like, why am I just show up and do a job every day, but am I going anywhere? Or am I being invested in? That causes disengagement. And lastly, misaligned review practices. That people that are trying to do the things that they think are right for them and that the company wants aren't being recognized or appreciated. It's a misalignment of incentives around how people are rewarded and reviewed. And side note, this is a big area for us when we consult with clients. And we can have deep conversations at an executive level, and a company might have even a strategic priority. One of their top 2, 3, 4, 5 strategic priorities may be improving employee engagement and workplace culture. Oftentimes, the right things are said, but when you get 1 or 2 levels down and you start asking questions about, well, what are the actual incentives for performance? How are people evaluated? How are contributions to culture either rewarded or disincentivized within your pay practices, your evaluation practices? If you don't get this kind of stuff all the way into those measures, then it can kind of sound a little bit like lip service if ultimately employees aren't either promoted or rewarded based on contributions to those strategic goals. So, all right. So that's what I found when I Google searched. And that's a pretty broad array. But I think I can boil it down into essentially 2 big categories. If you take that giant splash of stuff, the 15 factors that I just shared from 20 minutes of Google searching, okay? It really boils down into 2 things. There are 2 big reasons, 2 big things that inject poison that contribute to unhealthy workplace cultures. And from the top down, it's either ineffective or poor leadership. And that could be, intimidating, scary leadership. It could be just unfocused, not present leadership, but some form of, hey, our leaders aren't driving the type of culture we want. The other thing that stuff boils down to is toxic coworkers, coworkers that gossip, that are always negative, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, again, probably, 95% of what we do at Mindset and Better Culture is leadership development and training. So if you came onto this webinar to hear leadership development and training advice, that's not actually where I'm going today. Today, we're going to focus on that bullet number 2, toxic coworkers. And I'm going to essentially make the case that assuming you don't have leaders that are actively doing damage, that are creating a culture of fear and intimidation, things like that. So I'm going to set number 1 aside. And today, the number 1 poison to your company culture, I'm going to make the case that it is toxic, negative, cynical, disengaged employees. Here's where we're going to go with this, okay? I call these employees, and when we do training at Mindset and Better Culture, we use a term for these employees called vacuums, okay? If you have an employee, you can think of a vacuum, somebody who is negative, cynical, always has a complaint, never a positive attitude, always a woe is me. These are folks that if you think about a team of people and you have 1 or 2 of these vacuums, when they interact with other people on the team, it's almost like they just suck the energy right out of the room. That it's that when I have to interact with these folks, I leave feeling more hopeless, more depressed, like, oh my goodness, to get this person to do their share of the work is going to take such an effort, or that I just don't want to interact with them right now. I'm in a good mood and I don't want to be in a bad mood, okay? There's a subset of employees in most organizations that really pull the culture down and pull other people down instead of lift others up. And the term I'm going to use for that today is vacuums. So this number 1 poison to your company culture is what I want you to think of as these employees that act as energy vacuums on other people. And let me give you some data on where this term comes from and why it matters so much. We are in that one of the products that we offer to clients is employee engagement or culture surveys. What I have on the screen looks like a big mess, but if you'll just look at the red line is the average company score of all the organizations we've ever worked with across our 49 base questions in our culture survey, okay? Now, you don't need to know what all the questions are, but it relates to things like, do you have a risk of employee retention? How proud are your employees of the work that they do? Is there too much conflict in the organization? Do employees feel like they have input? How do people feel about their team and the team chemistry there? How do they feel about their direct manager? How do they feel about the C-suite? Do they feel like the company's innovative enough? Do they feel like that they personally are appreciated? How do they feel about their actual work environment, the physical work environment, whatever that looks like? How do they feel about opportunities for growth and advancement? There's a lot that goes into this survey. But I want to point you to one specific data point. This one right here, question 25 out of our 49 base questions, says this: supervisors in my company effectively address poor staff performance. You can read it right on the screen. I'm going to say it again. Supervisors in my company effectively address poor staff performance. Now, as you can see from the data here, of the 49 base questions that we ask, that is the second lowest data point. Okay, on average, that red line, right, that little character is pointing to, which means that a lot of employees across a lot of organizations don't feel like supervisors in their organizations are addressing their vacuum employees. They're employees that either are unaccountable, low energy, don't get their work done, but primarily most of employee dissatisfaction with colleagues has to do with attitude. It has to do with being this negative influence that's tiresome and frustrating to work with and around. Now, here's a question for you, and you can put this in the chat just to see if you're awake for me, if you wouldn't mind. But do you think it's your best employees that score that question low, or your worst employees, your bad employees? Who do you think scores that question the lowest? Good employees, hardworking employees, star employees? You can put any of those in the chat, or bad employees, underworking employees, etc. Okay. Yeah, it's your, thank you. It's, for the most part, it's your hardworking employees are going to say, hey, my company doesn't do a good job of this. I show up every day. I work hard. I have a positive attitude. I get my job done. I try to get even maybe more than what I'm responsible for done. I try to rally my team together. I try to help us be accountable. And every day I'm saddled with this person over here who just refuses to either show up on time, to actually get their work done, to be a positive part of the team, that undermines us every step of the way, that's a pain in the butt to work with, that's negative, that's cynical, that gossips, that is, always assuming the worst of their colleagues and of their company. And it's tiresome to work with this person. And essentially what your best employees are telling you through this survey data, and I say you because this is over 100 companies at least in this data that's been grabbed here. It's a good sample size. And on average, most companies have their best employees saying, will you please do something about this? I have to work with this vacuum employee day in and day out. And I'm looking around at my supervisors saying, is anybody noticing? Is anyone going to address this? It's a hardship on me. You could make my life better by addressing this situation. And yet, hello, it looks like you're not. So this is the reason, and the data associated, that the case I'm going to make for you today is that the number one poison to your company culture is vacuum employees, is employees who exert a draining and negative influence on their coworkers. That's where we're going today. Right? So if that's the problem, if vacuums are the problem, what's the solution? Well, we have, if you've been through a Mindset or Better Culture program before, or you've been to one of my webinars, you've probably heard that we teach 7 clear, crisp, useful principles of leadership that create a schema for how we think leaders should view their role as a leader when they interact with those around them. The 7 things that, if you have clear in your mind, will help you identify opportunities and be more effective at addressing those opportunities to create better and stronger culture. Well, leadership principle number 4 says this: leaders must protect the right of your good employees to work with other good employees. Now, please notice this does not say that your employees have a right to work with perfect colleagues, but good colleagues. What this principle is essentially saying is that if there's a line, and let's say it's right here, that this is good, this is acceptable. Now, we'd love you to be great, we'd love you to excel, we'd love you to be a rock star. We'll incentivize that. We'll try to figure out how to make that. But there's some point at which we say, there's the standard. The standard is, this is good, and the standard is like just under it. And if we have employees that are performing down here, well below the standard, what happens? Whose job is that? It's a leader's job. This is one thing that it's really not fair to look to a team or to a peer or to a lateral and say, hey, would you tell such and such to get their butt in gear? Or would you work with Brenda on her attitude? If you're a manager, if you're in a leadership role, this is one of the responsibilities fairly unequivocally that falls on your shoulders. It's your job to protect the right of your good staff to work with good staff. It's your job to set fair and reasonable standards. And when people fall well below those, to address it directly, to address it swiftly, and to essentially protect the right of those good employees to work with other good employees. If leaders will do that, that survey data that I just showed you won't happen. You won't have employees saying, yes, I wish my manager would effectively address poor staff performance. They would say, heck yeah, my manager effectively addresses poor staff performance. Okay. And that is the biggest detraction to your company culture. If on average, if you could just change only one thing in an average company to make their culture better, the number one thing you would change is remove all the vacuums. That'd be the biggest thing you could do to improve the culture. Not change their leadership philosophy, put in a new executive or HR team or core values, or no. The number one thing you could do, if you could only do one thing to advance company culture, kill all the vacuums. Okay. Remove those people that are pulling the culture down, and you'll be amazed what happens by how quickly a team works better together, communicates better, shows up with a more positive attitude. Okay. That's why it's the number one poison. So I want to introduce an analogy that I've alluded to here that I really love. And I think this is a great way to view what it means to build and protect a healthy workplace culture. Now, I've already told you this term of a vacuum, which I'm going to allude to again, but I want to introduce a second term, which is a star. So I'm going to have you, for a moment, envision whatever your team looks like. Now, this could be a team of 2 people. And if it's a team of 2 people, this full analogy is not going to work perfectly for you. But if you're a part of a larger organization, I want you to think of a good-sized team or a division, or if it's maybe a small business, the whole company. And I want you to think of that company as having both stars, and a star is just essentially somebody that you say, thank goodness they work here. I am so glad he or she or they are on our team. Okay. That's what a star is. A star is just somebody that shows up, positive attitude, works hard, is a role model. But stars essentially, I don't want to get ahead of myself. I'm just going to define it. Okay. Then I'm going to complete the analogy for you. Vacuums I've already defined. Vacuums are negative, cynical, unproductive. They drain energy. So here's the deal. This is my favorite analogy for thinking about what does it mean to create a better workplace culture? Well, you can think of your culture as in a constant battle and struggle between your stars who want to pull the culture up and your vacuums who want to suck people down. And here's the deal. If you want to have a better workplace culture, what you have to do is win the battle for the people in the middle. So let's say you have 100 employees, and let's say you got 10 stars, okay, flat out superstars. That's maybe a little low, but let's say 10 flat out role model superstars, and you got 5 vacuums, 5 people that, oh my gosh, are they a pain in the butt to work with? When you as a leader turn your back, those 10 stars are working their tail off to be good role models, to pull people along with them, to bring those 85 people in the middle a little further and a little further and a little further in the stars direction. But the vacuums at the same time, they're pulling that group down. That new employee that shows up, sits next to the vacuum, and they just sit there and, hey, oh yeah, welcome to hell. Let me tell you about our company. Let me tell you about the manager. Let me tell you about blah, blah, blah. All of a sudden that person, how do they think about their job? They're influenced by these vacuums. And all of a sudden, what they think they need to show up and do, or how they think about their team or their company, slowly shifts and goes down and down and down. A star has just the exact opposite influence. Isn't this place great? Don't you love Brenda? Boy, isn't this amazing? We got this great new initiative. There's all kinds of opportunities for you here. Oh, really? I'm getting more and more engaged. So you can think of your culture as a battle between your stars and your vacuums. And the question is, how are you going to win? Now, earlier I said one of the easiest ways to move your culture forward is to rid yourself of vacuums. Well, yeah, if they fall off the end of that tug of war rope, all of a sudden you got 10 stars, 90 people in the middle and no vacuums, it's clear which direction your culture is going to move. Okay? So this is really, really important. I know it sounds a little childish, but it's one of the easiest and simplest ways to think about culture and which direction it's being influenced. So if you want to win that battle for the middle, if you want to help your stars win, and you want to decrease either the number or the influence of your vacuums, well, what does it take? Now we're moving forward into something much more practical. So hopefully I've framed up an interesting schema for you, a way to think about company culture, but what does it actually take to make a difference? Because for anyone here on this webinar who is here just because you like learning, you like new thoughts and ideas, welcome. I am glad you're here. Just know that your culture, your organization doesn't change at all just by having you learn something, right? Just when you read a new book or you attend a new class or you come to my webinar, just by purely having new knowledge in your brain does zero for your culture. The only thing that changes your culture is if you change your behavior or if you change your company's behavior. You have to do something with the knowledge. So what does it actually take? If you buy my premise that you want your stars to be winning and your vacuums to be losing this battle for the middle, what does it take? Here's a few thoughts on the type of mindset and the type of company processes that it takes to really make progress on culture. Again, feel free to throw questions in the chat and I'll try to look for them. If I miss them, put them in there multiple times, all right? Number one is to not be afraid of having some subjective element in leadership. Now, what do I mean by this? In a lot of organizations, they have designed their management and HR practices to be really focused on specific, measurable objectives. So if I'm going to evaluate the performance of an employee, one approach that has been advocated for quite a few years, similar to sort of a management by objectives approach, that people say, look, this is how you be fair to your employees. You tell them, look, I'm going to tell you exactly how I'm going to measure you. We're going to make the way that we identify whether or not you make those goals perfectly clear and concrete. And then at the end of the year, we're just going to see how you scored. And that's how we're going to measure your performance. Maybe you'll get a raise, maybe you'll get a bonus. But in order to be fair, we're really going to work hard to make those the things we're measuring very clear and objective. So was the project completed? On what time? What sales number did you hit? You know, sort of that SMART goal approach. And there's nothing wrong with SMART goals, right? Specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound, right? A SMART goal. That's great. And the reason that HR systems tend to like those types of goals and those types of performance management processes is because they're easy to measure. Did people do it or not? It takes the subjectivity out of leadership. Well, when it comes to culture, when it comes to this idea of stars and vacuums and are you pulling people up or pulling people down, it's attitude, it's work ethic, it's intangibles, it's influence, it's leadership. And if you want to try to incentivize stars and address vacuums, you have to be willing to have performance management conversations around these sort of squishy, subjective things. What do you mean I had a negative attitude? How do you know? Well, I don't have an objective test or measure that can document that for the HR file. I'm just telling you, you do, and it's an issue and it needs to change, right? So some managers are afraid to address things like attitude because it's hard to measure. I'm telling you, it's a big, big mistake. You've got to be willing to have conversations, performance management conversations about things that are a little subjective. And you have to not be afraid of that subjectivity from an HR or legal perspective. Does that make sense? I hope so. Next thing that aligns very much with that first one. You've got to have a committed HR team or partner that values culture, that understands this idea of stars versus vacuums, and that's willing to help you hold vacuums sort of feet to the fire for the influence, that subjective influence that they have on their teams. I have worked with organizations in the past where I'm doing an isolated training with a group of leaders, and they say, look, when we try to address those things, HR kind of says, what can you document? Or can you give me something more detailed? Or, okay, but geez, I'm not sure how we can address that without a really long time span. Okay, let's document more. Let's document more. What else can we give them they deal with vacuums for 6 months or a year without really ever getting to the end of the line. And that makes it really hard if you don't have a committed HR partner that's willing to say, no, this is unacceptable. This falls below that line of what is reasonable to ask from employees from a contribution standpoint, and we're going to address it. And we're going to make it a performance issue. We're going to put them on a performance plan. We're going to give them a last chance. And ultimately, we're going to say, thanks for shopping. See you later. You're no longer welcome in our organization if someone isn't willing to at least meet a fair standard. They don't have to be great. They just have to not be a vacuum on a daily basis. Okay. So you got to have a committed HR team to get here. Okay. Another thing that you need is a manager who's willing to have lots of conversations, who has the energy and the drive to address these things when they pop up. Because attitude stuff, it's easy to just let it slide. Oh, that's just James being James. I wish he wouldn't have said that in the meeting, but I just don't have the energy to talk to him about it again. Okay. The more of these negative attitude, spiteful comments, undermining behaviors, assuming the worst in people, oh, thank God it's Friday, can't wait to get out of here. That kind of stuff, the more of that you let slide, the harder it becomes to address it. Because, well, I just did it 8 days in a row. Now it's the 9th day. Why are you talking to me about it? This stuff needs to be addressed quickly. Otherwise, it's sort of, you're sort of setting the precedent that you don't really care when you don't consistently address it when it happens. The other thing, which your committed HR partner will tell you, is you've got to document these conversations. You've got to document the times that you try to address it. Because I can't tell you how many times a manager will go to HR and essentially say, oh my goodness, I just can't take this anymore. This person is a cancer on our team. And HR will say, oh, really? How long has it been a problem? 18 months. What have you done about it? What can you document? And the manager says, well, really nothing to this point. Okay, now we need to start at zero on making sure that we're being fair to this employee and letting them know what their performance issues are, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? And lastly, this one's a little controversial, and I'm not an HR specialist, so take it or leave it, okay? But back to that data that I shared about how employees rate that question low, that says supervisors in my company do a good job dealing with poor staff performance. I will tell you, sometimes in those companies that have low scores on that question, managers are trying to address poor staff performance. They are, but nobody knows about it because it happens under the HR cone of silence. HR says, boy, we have to really stretch this out over a long period of time and give lots of chances. And that may or may not be the right way to go for that organization. But what happens if I'm a great employee and I'm sitting next to somebody every day who's making my life miserable, and the manager is addressing it, but I don't know about it? How do I feel? How do I feel about my company and my manager? We like to make the case that in that situation, there's really only two things that I can be thinking. Either my manager doesn't care, or second, they're just too stupid to notice. Okay? They don't care, or they're not paying enough attention to notice that there's an issue. Now, there can be situations where, no, my manager cares, and they have noticed, and they've been working with this person for 3 months, but it's invisible to me. Well, is that good for the manager and good for the company if I'm getting frustrated going, will somebody do something about this? And they are, but I don't know about it. So here's our advice that's not HR advice. But our advice is to simply go to your stars and say, hey, I know that such and such, that there's a little bit of a problem. I just want you to know that I'm aware of it and it's being addressed. I appreciate your support in the meantime. That's it. Not opening the HR file, not getting into any details about where we are in a progressive discipline policy, just simply letting people know, hey, I'm aware there's a problem and we're working on it. And thank you so much for your patience as here's what you could do to be helpful, right? That kind of thing will let people know that you're aware of the problem and that somebody's trying to address it. And if you'll just do that one simple thing, all of a sudden that low score on my company effectively deals with poor staff performance, that score starts to rise, because I don't need to know the details. I just need to know that somebody cares and it's being addressed, that you're trying to protect my right to work with good employees. So just think about that for a moment. On do you and your organization, how extreme are you in making sure that nobody knows when there's a performance sort of management process going on, versus, I'm not saying tell everybody, but if you got a couple stars, maybe just loop them under the tent and say, hey, I'm aware, we're working on it. Food for thought. Talk to your HR team before you implement that. All right. So last part of my presentation. We've identified that these vacuum employees are a major problem. We've identified what it takes, sort of those 4 steps of things that it takes to at least sort of set yourself up to be able to address these situations. The last thing I want to share is 3 or 4, I think I added a 4th one, specific tactics that you can use to try to specifically address and improve your vacuum employees, help them realize what they need to do to be a success and improve them, or if that doesn't work over time, to help move them out, to say, you know what, we've given you chances and opportunities. Here's a process to help exit them over time. So, because again, if we can improve a vacuum or exit a vacuum, the stars keep winning that tug of war for the culture. And that makes a big difference. It's the #1 thing you can do. So I first want to introduce a topic that we probably get maybe the most feedback from our training content when we talk about dealing with problem employees, from managers, where they say, this was helpful. Okay. So lean in here with me for a second. It's a simple concept, but it's pretty darn helpful. We call it the sea of possibilities. And the sea of possibilities is the first question you should ask yourself when you have an employee who's not meeting standards. Now, this doesn't always mean just a vacuum employee. This is a general non-performing employee, okay? And the question here is, what is causing their lack of performance? Is it S, okay, C of possibilities, SEA? Is it S, a skill deficit? Let's say that you're coaching a basketball team, all right? And you're running a full court press defense that you worked on this week in practice, and you spring it on the opponent the last 2 minutes of the first half, and you're hoping to get a couple turnovers and a couple easy baskets. And one of your players, when you call that defense, isn't in the right spot. They're out of position. The other team goes bing, bing, bing down the court, makes a layup, and instead of you getting an advantage, they get an easy bucket. And you look at that player and you say, what the heck's going on? Okay, that's a performance problem. But the first question you need to ask yourself before you know what to do to address that performance problem as a coach, you got to ask yourself 3 questions. #1, is it a skill issue or a knowledge issue? Does that player just not know where to go when you call that press? They heard the call, they just didn't, they forgot where to go. Well, if that's the case, how do you improve their performance? You teach them, you train them, you drill it, you go over it more in practice. Okay, maybe they missed practice, maybe they just need a couple repetitions to get more comfortable with it. They need the skill and the training to improve their performance. Great. If so, prescribe training. Okay, do some one-on-one coaching, do some things to help them get the skills that they need. Second option is, no, they knew where they're supposed to be. They knew they were at practice. They know exactly where they're supposed to be. They just were waving at their girlfriend or boyfriend in the stands. Okay, this is an effort issue. Or they didn't bust their tail as hard as they could to get there. They sort of jogging back, or trying to look cool or something. That's an effort issue. They knew where they're supposed to go. They just weren't working hard enough to get there. Now, in the workplace, a lot of effort issues that when we ask employees, when we poll employees in our trainings, tell me what a problem employee looks like in your work environment. About 70% of the responses are either bad attitude or lack of effort. And so we actually lump those two things together. If you've got somebody on your team that has an attitude issue, that's a vacuum, that's just negative, that's an effort issue. Okay. If they would put forth the effort to show up with a positive attitude, they could do it. They're choosing not to, in most cases, right? So if you have an effort issue, do you send somebody to training? Do you teach them what to do? No, you just give them a wake-up call. If you're that coach of the basketball team, you yell at that player, you grab them by the shirt and you say, sit your butt on the bench until you're willing to work hard. We're going to put somebody else out there. Okay. I'm not drilling this next week in practice. You know what to do. This is just an effort issue. We need to try to get this person's attention and motivate them to perform. Okay. Lastly, and this is the toughest one, if you have a performance issue, maybe it's an ability mismatch. Maybe, oh no, they know what's expected of them. They've been through all the trainings. They're putting forth effort. They're trying really hard. They just can't perform the role that you're asking them to perform. They're just not a fit for whatever reason that might be. And ability mismatches are if you have a heart as a manager, having an employee that's busting their tail, that's working hard, but they're still not meeting your fair and reasonable standards. Those are the tough ones. These are the ones that you have a heart for. But ultimately, if it's your job to protect the right of good employees to work with other good employees, and you got somebody that can't carry their fair share of the load, it still needs to be addressed. And you can do it with heart and empathy. Hopefully you can find them a spot to be successful inside your organization in a different role. If not, I would say these are the types of folks you should bust your tail to help them transition even to another company into a successful spot. Because we want to be committed to our employees' success, both at work and in life. And if just because of a skill mismatch or an ability mismatch, they just simply can't do the job we're asking them to do, find a way to help them be successful somewhere else. But ultimately, you still have to protect that right of your other employees to work with people that can meet the standard. So that's the sea of possibilities. Is it skill, effort, or ability? And your intervention is totally different depending on what the answer is. The way you address the problem is completely different. Next thing, when you are delivering feedback to an employee who's not meeting standards, the way that they are immediately and instantaneously responding to you tells you a lot about how likely they are to change and improve if you know what to look for. So this next idea is, let's say you've got a non-performing employee, somebody with a bad attitude, somebody that's exerting a negative influence on the team, and you decide to have a discussion about it. Pay special attention to how they respond to your feedback. We call this the DNA of employee error. If immediately they are defensive or nonchalant, okay, the D or the N, these are the bad ones. A is going to be the good one, okay? I'll get to that in a second. But if they're defensive, if they say, what do you mean? Like, I have a fine attitude, like that. Everybody else does the same thing. Or why does it matter? Or, I'm not getting paid to show up and smile. I just get paid to do whatever. These are all defensive reactions. And this is not boding well that this employee is hearing your message and likely to change. Okay. The goal of this concept is to give you some sense of how much time and energy should you spend trying to save this person or help them improve their performance versus, okay, let me make sure I document that because we're moving down a different path as quickly as possible. Okay. Nonchalant, same thing. I had someone I met with on Wednesday of this week that said, oh my goodness, I have an employee that made a major mistake. And when I addressed it with her, that she literally shrugged her shoulders like, oh, okay, sorry. And she went and took a nap. So in the office, this is about as nonchalant as you could possibly get. And this manager I was talking with said, I didn't know what to do when this is like a 5-alarm fire. She just said, oh, okay, I'll try to not do it next time. And 10 minutes later was taking a nap in the office. This is not a good indication of an employee who has a resolve to improve their performance or change. Okay. So again, if you see defensiveness or nonchalance, step up the speed of your performance management process. The last thing, the A, is what you do want to see. You do want people who are hyper accountable. If the second you start to have that performance management conference, somebody is saying, oh, I can't believe I screwed that up. I know it's been eating me up all day. You're almost done with that performance conference because they're beating themselves up already. You don't need to go through 5 minutes of explaining what you expected to see and why it didn't happen. And, if this happens again, we're probably going to have to do it before. No, just say, good, thank you. I appreciate it. And by the way, people make mistakes. You're so valued here. Thank you for everything you do. Okay. So totally different directions depending on if people are being defensive or nonchalant. Okay, I'm going to have to step up the intensity of my feedback. If they're agitated with themselves and hyper accountable, then go a different direction. Don't document it. Don't write it down. Just say, okay, this is somebody who feels bad about the mistake that they made and has an actual resolve to fix it. Next one, quickly, the 4-step. This is, if you're very experienced at doing performance conferences with folks, this is probably something similar to what you're doing already. But we even have high-level executives that have been in management for 20 years that tell us, you know what, this is helpful even to me. I've been through a lot of these conferences, and even this simple 4-step process is helpful to me. When you decide to have a conversation with somebody about a performance issue, we advise that you go through these same 4 steps every single time. Okay? Well, I shouldn't say every time, because the one caveat to this is if you already have made the determination that you don't want this employee on the team anymore, that's a different category. But assuming you're still trying to give this person an opportunity to be successful and that you think they can be successful, the first step is to make them feel safe in the conversation. Nobody likes to get the email that says, hey, you got a sec to stop by my office from a manager. No idea what it's about, but I kind of know I've been screwing something up, or I had a bad interaction in a meeting, or I missed a deadline, or whatever. Every single person's anxiety goes up in that moment. People don't like to be surprised to have to go have a talk, performance management talk with a boss. Okay. That always causes anxiety. And anxiety acts against, it inhibits, it prevents our ability to rationally absorb information. So if an employee is super nervous, oh, what's going to happen? Am I getting fired? Well, my boss mad at me? What's going to happen next? Whatever it is that you're about to say next, they're not going to hear it because their anxiety is clouding their ability to calmly have a conversation about their performance and figure out how it can get fixed. So first thing you got to do, make them feel safe. Lots of ways you can do that. I like a fairly straightforward approach of just saying, look, I don't love having these conversations. I'm guessing you know why we're in here. We do have to talk, but I want you to know, I think I anticipate this is something that you can easily resolve and that we're going to be on a really great path in the next couple of weeks. So just, hey, you're not getting fired. I'm not mad. Like we're going to have a talk, but I like you. I trust you. I'm optimistic about where things are going. That kind of stage setting helps people take a deep breath, let their guard down, just sit down and hear you and have a conversation. The next piece of advice is probably the most important, which is don't start a performance conference by making an accusation or by saying, here's what you did wrong. Okay. Start the conversation from a more open-ended perspective by doing what we call describing the gap between what I expected of you and what I think I observed, okay, or what's been reported to me, okay. I expect our folks to show up and exhibit our core values, one of which is positivity. I've heard or I've observed that the last 2 days in a row, you've come in with a really negative attitude. In fact, you've said this and this. That's describing the gap. I'm not describing motives. I'm not saying that it's a problem necessarily. I'm just saying, here's what I expected. Here's what's been reported or I've observed. Okay, just describe the gap and then move to step 3, which is essentially say, can you tell me about why that's the case? And listen. Then it's your job to listen. Zip it. Okay. Tell me about that gap. Why is that? Why is that happening? Is that happening? Tell me a little bit about your perspective. I thought the project was going to be in Tuesday morning. I didn't get it till Wednesday afternoon. Can you tell me what happened? And then listen. While you're listening for the 2 things above, item 1 and 2. Was it a skill issue? Did they not know something or didn't have the right resources? Was it an effort issue, or is there potentially an ability issue here? You're watching for the DNA of employee error. Are they responding defensively or nonchalant, or are they just frustrated with themselves? Okay, all of these things and that listening step are what you're watching for, because those things are going to influence the planning step, which is step 4. As I mentioned with the basketball coach analogy, you might have a very different plan depending on what that employee's do or what that player is, how they're responding to your feedback. Okay, if they're nonchalant, they seem like they're not putting forth effort, maybe they sit the bench. If they're unbelievably frustrated with themselves and they're crying and they're, coach, I studied the playbook for 2 hours and like I can't believe I didn't have that, and like, okay, good, this player's not going to make that same mistake again, right? Or maybe you just realize they're too slow to get there, and that's the tough one. Okay, but I love this 4-step. Everybody should use it because it opens up for authentic conversation. This last one I'm going to skip for today. You know, I told you in my introduction, I only promised 3 of these tactics. And given that we're almost at the end of our presentation, I'm going to skip this last one. But if you want to know more about it, shoot me a note sometime. I am trying out a new survey software. I've only asked my folks to do this a couple of times, but I would love, if you have a second, for you to pull out your phone and grab the QR code that's on your screen, or to simply go to talk.ac/Brett on any browser. And when you get there, it'll ask you to put in this code TALK right here, this code in the gray box. And if you do that, while I am concluding this webinar, you'll be asked to rate how a few things about this program, and you'll be asked a couple questions about whether or not you book speakers and things like that. But you know, just respond authentically. I would love the feedback about the presentation. I also just am trying to see how this software works, because I think it's something that has a potential to give us really good feedback on our presentations and create value for our clients and customers as well. So feel free to pull that up. I'm going to take it off the screen here in a second. So if you want to grab your camera, take a little picture of the QR code, click on it. Or if you want to go to talk.ac/Brett, I would love to hear your feedback about today's session. And now I'm going to move to sort of my close, and then a few minutes for Q&A if anybody's got it. So I described earlier today this idea of framing up your culture as a battle between your stars and your vacuums. And I made the case that these vacuums, these folks that are mostly negative and cynical, but also to a certain degree unaccountable, not hardworking, etc., that they're the biggest poison to your company culture. And so the question then becomes, you as a leader, as an influencer in your organization, what are you doing to try to help your stars win that battle for the middle, to move your culture incrementally in the right direction? What are you doing? And one of the easiest ways that you can equip your organization to keep making steady progress forward is to tilt the world in favor of your stars and away from your vacuums. What can you do via your influence to give those stars more credibility, more power, more influence, to create more stars? Okay? And what can you do to disincentivize, to disenable, to shrink the influence and the number of vacuum employees, to make them feel less comfortable, and to make your stars feel like, hey, this is my company. Okay? Anything you can do to tilt that balance away from your stars and towards your vacuums helps you move your company forward. So the number one poison to your company culture, assuming that you don't have abusive leadership, is your vacuums. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Thanks for being here. I always love hosting these webinars. If you have questions, again, my name is Brett Hoogeveen, co-founder of BetterCulture. I would love to answer them. So feel free to put questions in the chat, and I will respond if anybody has it. Okay, we've got, what if one of your biggest vacuums is a member of top management? Not a performance issue, but attitude and title. Okay, so This is a really good question. When we work with consulting clients, when we do deeper engagement with organizations, step number one, okay, is to work with the executive leadership team and to make sure that they are aligned about both the value of culture and what it looks like. Okay? Now, I'm an outsider. I'm a consultant and I'm being paid to give advice to these companies. So it's easier for me to walk in and look and say, good, look, guys, here's the ground rules. Don't engage with us if you don't care, if you don't believe our business case for the value of culture, and if you're not going to hold each other accountable to moving in that direction. Okay. So as an outsider, it's easier for me to bring that up than it is for, say, I'm just going to imagine sort of a mid-level manager who reports up to somebody else to call them out on their disruptive behavior. That being the case, if you have other executives in the organization that really, really do care about culture, I think it's a question you could ask of them. Hey, what do you think? I'm going to make up a name, but what do you think Barb's impact is on the culture? And see what that other executive says if you have a trusting relationship. You can try to give feedback directly, but depending on the organization and how bought in and how committed you are to building a better culture, you'll have more allies and more places to try to bring it up, and that executive will have less room to squirm or to protest or to, et cetera. If your company's not committed, and if you don't have other allies or other folks that are talking about this on a regular basis or that are going to hold them accountable, candidly, it's hard to address. So I hope that's not discouraging, but I think, if you imagine an imaginary company that is not terribly focused on culture, and they have an executive that rules with an iron fist and is kind of intimidating and, yells or screams or whatever, what is your recourse? You don't really have any. I mean, it's tough. You can't go somewhere else if there's not sort of a team of people saying, we care about culture. You kind of have to just deal with it. You can try to give feedback. You can try to ask them questions, hey, why do you lead this way? Or do you think there might be a better way? But I think it's hard to address unless you've got allies. Hopefully that's a helpful question. That's what we do as outsiders. We try to create those allies. We try to raise the awareness of the importance. And then in our first couple interactions with an executive team, hey, we care about this, right? We're committed, right? We're going to police each other, right? We're going to push each other, right? And once we get that buy-in, okay, now I can go have those conversations. Hey, Jim, you said you were gonna help us build this set for this play, but you actually showed up and just knocked it down every day. What's the deal? Are you going to get on board or not? But unless you set the stage for that with expectations of an executive team, it's hard. Other questions? I don't know if that answers your question, but if not, feel free to ask a second one. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the notes. Appreciate you guys, the messages, a couple of the private messages. Appreciate you all being here. Thanks for tuning in. I always just stick around until a couple minutes after in case people have extra questions, but don't feel like you need to stick around. See you, everybody. Thanks for being here. You're welcome. You're welcome, John. You're welcome, Melody. You're welcome, Danielle. Nina. Thank you guys for being here. Oh, I did have one other question, but it looks like, the person that asked it, I see it in the Q&A. There was a question about, could I briefly touch on the difference between skill and ability? It looks like that person is still here, so I'm happy to answer that one if it hasn't been addressed yet. Oh yeah, you just asked it. Wonderful. So skill or knowledge is in one camp. Okay. Ability is sort of like, no matter how many times we teach them or train them, they're still not going to have the ability to do the job at the level we need. So the easiest way to explain it is back to my basketball analogy. Let's say you got a player who shows up early to practice, busts his tail, like really, really works hard, studies the playbook, first one to practice, picks up the jerseys, like, just phenomenal. they're just slow and short. Okay. Well, as much as they have the knowledge, and maybe even some of the ball skills or other things, and as much as they're putting forth the effort, I still maybe can't put them on the court, or they can't play that press defense because they can't get from where they are at to where they need to go. They're just too slow to get there. So ability mismatches tend to be situations where, it could be a lot of different things, but essentially you've tried several times to retrain, to reskill, to give feedback, and they're trying hard and they're still just either making too many mistakes or not productive enough. I don't want to assume what might be leading into that, but I think you know what I mean, that there's just some people, maybe it's a sales position and they're just too nervous to like go knock on doors or make phone calls. Okay. It's just an ability mismatch. We've trained you, you're trying, but it's just not a fit for you. Maybe they're in a secretarial role and they just have slow typing skills, whatever it is. That's what ability looks like. So hopefully that was helpful. It's sort of, a lot of times you can't figure out the ability stuff right away. You figure it out after you do a training, after you try to teach them again, after you say, are they trying as hard as they could? Once you know that they have this, they've been trained several times, they've been given multiple tries, they're working hard at it, and they're still not succeeding. That's sort of when you realize, like, okay, I think it might be time to cut bait here. Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions? See a few of you hanging on. Makes me want to stick around, but otherwise, maybe I have another. Looks like about it. All right. Thank you guys for being here. Wonderful to spend the time with you. Enjoy the rest of your week and the afternoon. We won't host another of these till after the holidays and the new year. So go out there and make somebody's culture better today. See you later.